And we have three wonderful presentations this afternoon. And let me see whether there are any questions. Please write your questions at the chat, or if you want, just raise your hand in the chat and we'll see you. Before the questions come in, may I use the imperative of the chair to ask questions first? And I have one question for Dr. Zhang and one question for Casey. For Dr. Zhang, I was wondering whether in the text you deal with, because you have introduced the reflection of the damage to the persona and the authors done to them by environmental destruction in the industrial environment of China. I wonder whether you also detect any reflection on the damage of the environment itself, rather than the suffering such damage inflicts on the human being in these texts. Or do you detect any of these of such impulse in any other contemporary texts? In other words, are there any evidence of the reflection being centered on the environment rather than the persona in these texts or any other texts in contemporary age? And my question for Casey is, you're really very interesting and brilliant examination of the image of cloud in real terms and also in metaphorical terms, and how the state of China tried to manage them. Would you see that as a representation or representative handling of China on forces which cannot be dealt with by its governance system? Am I making myself? I don't know whether I'm asking my question clearly, but I wonder whether Dr. Zhang or Casey want to start our discussion first.
Yes, I could answer Jessica's wonderful question. Yeah, thank you. It's a very relevant question, and it's something I constantly actively look for and think about. Definitely, there are all these traces, maybe not so obvious especially in film productions, because I think this idea of to mediate environmental destruction through the human body, it's still pretty much, I think, still more academic discourse. So what I'm trying to do when seeing this film is to have this material feminism lens to guide me to how to see damaged human body in terms of a post-humanistic way, while the body itself is already embedded with the broader environmental destruction. So that's what I read from documentary footage, but it is more evident in the migrant workers' poetry directly from, I think many of them wrote about, apart from their industrial environment, the human suffering. They write about directly the rivers being polluted, the trees being cut down, not only in the Pearl River Delta, but also in their inland hometowns when they travel back. But I didn't really include so many texts directly because of the time limits, but definitely I want to have this more, I think, focused analyze in future development of the paper. But I think what really relevant for me in applying this framework of transcorporeal reality is really about we have to situate the toxin materiality manifested in the human in already connecting with the environment. So the human body and the environment are already a co-production. So it's not to separate, demarcate the human cause and environmental cause, but to see them as together. And migrant workers, especially female migrant workers' body, is the best, one of the, I think, the most exemplified materialities that we could see the cost on human corporeality, also the cost on the non-human part. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think that's so far my thoughts on this question.
Thank you very much, Dr. This is, you've given us a lot of food for thought. And Casey, would you want to respond to?
If I understand your questions well correctly, Jessica, I guess maybe well, these are just preliminary kind of ideas for these presentations. So I guess I'm making a tautological argument. Well, kind of, because I start with William Burroughs' argument about, the impasse of control, the paradox of control. If the control is successful, then there would be no control because the control will collapse. So then they need resistance. They need something that they have, the mechanism cannot have full control over. So I guess, if to apply to cloud control in real sense or in metaphorical sense, I think China precisely try to embody or perpetuate such kind of paradox, precisely because there's something that they are not able to control. And that kind of control mechanism can keep on running. And so I guess, just like what I said at the beginning, the weather modification technology is a kind of a problematic science. They have never been exactly proved for its efficacy and all that. And then they can continue to pump in money and try to make themselves believe that they have some sense of power over this kind of very unstable weather or even climate condition and all that. And I guess it probably go parallels with the way how the civil society has been monitored and put under surveillance. Yeah, it looks like, I guess, so far on the surface, the civil society is pretty much, put under their heel and have fully control over. But they keep, I guess, the elites, the ruling elites will keep kind of creating new reasons to justify bringing in new mechanism to monitor the society, I guess. So I guess that is somehow, I try to engage in this paradox rather than simply pointing out, okay, China is an authoritarian state, then they have power exerting over their people and all that. I just want to look at the complexity of its control mechanism, both at the sky and also on the ground. So I don't know whether this is just a preliminary kind of a response to your questions. Maybe I need more time to think about that one.
Yeah, thank you, Casey. This is fascinating. And we have David and Kiwai and also Diane. But before that, I think Emily has raised her hand first. So Emily, could you please unmute yourself?
Can you help me? Can you hear me? Oh, yes.
Yes.
Hello, I have two little questions, one for Dr. Zhang, one for Casey. So my question for Zimu is, you use this eco-feminist framework to understand the toxic bodies produced during the urbanization, of the female migrant worker. I wonder where can we place the male migrant worker in this framework? Because lots of constructions, for example, are also done by the male migrant workers. So if, where do we place them? And the other little comment or question here is, can we sort of escape or go beyond the framework that only approaches these migrant workers as pure victims? Because, in our panel as well, we raised this question about the interesting case of Guiyu in Guangzhou province, where the local migrant workers actually welcome e-waste. A lot of them actually appreciate it because it is a means to make money and people depend on it. So from that sense, there is this idea about they are not just victims, or they actively, refuse victimization. So I wonder, how does that dynamic about the migrant workers, some complexity comes into the conversation. And my question for Casey is, so fascinating because my own work kind of intersects with all this thinking. I can really find lots of resonances among our work as well in relation to control that, and also the inevitable byproduct of order building, which is the production of human waste or waste itself, for example. So my first question is about geoengineering in general. So I just want to know your opinion to geoengineering, because it's so controversial. On the one hand, a big argument by eco critics is, geoengineering, it gives you a plan B. that there is something that we might do to help climate change. So therefore, we don't have to try so hard with what we currently have, right, in our measures. On the other hand, some scientists also argue that it is very good. We also develop the research and technology in this field in order to, but it is, very, very hard to actually control, because once it's got into, the hands of power and capital, for example. So, and my second question is about the image, or to think about cloud itself. So I really like how you sort of unpacked this paradoxical relationship about this cloud control in the steel engineering or surveillance paradigm. Is on the one hand, they know this cloud, they instrumentalize this weather as weapons to use it objectively, to aim precisely. But on the other hand, they also know it's flexible, everything is connected, therefore they can build a dam and alter the routes of the river so other people could, suffer. So I wonder, besides this flow and isolation, whether we can also try to think about cloud in terms of transmutation, like cloud, how it can morph into other forms. And once it drops on the ground, are there, again, I'm thinking about sort of a grassroots resistance, the depth of transmutation is, what about people, who receive those clouds, and do they attach, for example, I don't know, I guess this is the open question. Those people who, they ultimately, their bodies or their perceptions or their voices that actually reflect that control is always impossible to attain, such as how they, their folk religion or their cultural beliefs, how they approach, clouds, how they actually, there is something more just beyond seeing,
Perhaps we should invite, thank you, Emily.
Perhaps sorry, taking up too much time.
Not at all, no. I just worry that Dr. Zhang will forget the question. Perhaps we should invite Dr. Zhang to respond, and then Casey.
Thank you. Just call me Zimu, it's fine. Thank you, Emily, for your wonderful questions. For sure, they're also very valid when I actually still writing about this piece. I'm sorry if I was maybe going through in a way to seemingly maybe juxtapose this gender dichotomy, which is not my intention. But I think for sure, ecofeminist way, especially transcorporeality, apply for sure for all genders, all sexualities, and male plays the same role as in terms of mediating this toxicity, pain, trauma, in terms of the human corporeality. But I think I'm mostly just highlighting the female experience, especially when it's mostly still marginalized in what we can see in the non-state independent productions. And that's my intention to first highlight their experiences, especially in terms of reproduction, which is often still romanticized in a way that's, when we still using ecofeminism, we often overlook this toxicity in reproduction and also this domination of female in the process of reproduction. I think the role of male could especially also being more evoked in the sense of actually what Dai Jinhua was writing about, the 1980s cultural momentum of this classical father and son relationship in majority Chinese production, I think until today. I think it's also meaningful to revert this kind of particular patriarchal relation, but male was deeply embedded. I'm actually thinking about how maybe we can think about the independent documentary called I Love Smart, or 爱杀马特 by Li Yifan. I'm not sure if some have seen it. And then a lot of actually smart are young males who are using this very very stylish, smart hairstyle. In a way, I will see it as a queering of the body, actually to revert, to go against this very typical masculinity, male image in the industrial working environment. So I think that that's something I am thinking, and maybe in the future would like to write about to connect with this ecofeminist perspective. And for the second question, yes, for sure, I don't see them as victim, even though I write about the toxicity, pain, and trauma. But in a way, for sure, I want to highlight how they co-live with this in the everyday level, still carried out this labor, still develop this very diverse relationship with their work environment. Especially, it's often very effective how they overcome this pain and how they still kind of remain hopeful in a way. And what I'm thinking, yes, I think definitely how to co-live, and also in the examples I gave, I think both in Zheng Xiaochung's poetry and also later in the documentary Outcry and Whisper, you can see very active, even revengeful, angry female dissidents. So that's a way I think it's definitely not a victim image, but it's very actively voicing out their critique and rebelling against the system. And even in the way, I think it's very powerfully having this revenge woman character. For example, in Zheng Xiaochung, I think recent short novel called Killing Daughter, I'm not sure how it's translated. She actually depicts a female migrant worker based on a real event, that how she's being trafficking and being forced to have children, and then exiled to work in the factories. But then after all these turbulences, she returned to her home villages, but it resulted in killing her own daughter. In a way, it's really, I think it's a tragedy, but it's also in a way you can manifest a lot of this suppression that symbolically could be telling from this even cruel woman violence. So I think that's also a direction to think about, not to victimize, but to see this everyday level of co-living, overcoming, and even revenge, feminist way. Yeah, thank you.
Casey?
Okay, well, thanks for Emily for very inspiring comments. To respond to your two questions or comments, I think the first one, the geoengineering, I guess is a rather tempting kind of technology because they haven't been really put in action, put in practice. They are all kind of pure talk. So it's also very controversial, even among the scientists. I remember some years ago, the Anthropocene group has invited the ex-director of Hong Kong Observatory, Lam Chiu-ying, to come to our campus to talk about Anthropocene and all that. And then, Mr. Lam had trashed these geoengineering because they think, he simply accused them, they are only one-way thinkers. They never thought of the side effects possibly created by their so-called kind of big projects, build an umbrella to shape against the sunlight, in order to kind of deal with the global warming and everything. So they never think of the side effects, the possible kind of second order problems were created by their so-called geoengineering projects. So in a way, geoengineering remains a sci-fi kind of scenario, I think, at this point. So I don't know. We don't have the knowledge to talk a bit more about this, but somehow we see it as an interesting kind of thing to let us have a different kind of imaginary about the way how human beings can deal with the climate change. For your second question, I guess that's a wonderful comment. I guess we definitely cloud could be understood as a site of contact between the officials as well as the non-state actors. But unfortunately, I haven't done my research to look at the way how the non-state actors will deal with clouds. But I'm sure there would be long traditions of dealing with clouds. For example, think about our traditional landscape painting, and also many ethnic crafts, ethnic arts work, and all that. They definitely use cloud as a significant theme or area to kind of to facilitate the story, convey the narrative, and all that. So I think yes, cloud is a very amorphous kind of bodies subjected to different narrations, different kind of interpretations and appropriations. Well, but so far, well, it is the state that somehow try to monopolize, well, the metaphor of cloud or the image of cloud, well, as far as I understand it. But when we dig deep into the Chinese culture, I guess, well, or maybe even the traditions or the popular culture, well, you will find a lot of examples that deal with clouds. Okay. Jessica, shall I respond to Kiwai's questions were in the chat box?
David, also, I was thinking about inviting you to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, David and Kiwai both. Yeah, because of time element, the time factor, and both questions invite Casey to elaborate on.
Maybe I haven't seen what David's questions. Maybe I've answered Kiwai's questions first. Well, yes, about the popularity of process philosophy by Whitehead. To be honest, I guess, well, it's somewhat, I feel like it is more about, well, the Chinese intellectuals, well, who somehow have strong connection with the American theological scholar, John Cobb Jr. and all that, well, because, well, they have organized workshops and conferences in Claremont, California for more than 10 years. Well, they have a series on these issues about ecology and how they can appropriate the Western kind of mode of thinking about ecology in a Chinese context. So it's more like the narrative by the Chinese intellectual, and they somehow also kind of claim that, well, they have influence, well, on the Chinese officials. I guess, well, just a pure speculations. The Chinese officials would welcome anything, well, that is beyond, they're somehow different from the dominant US model or a Western model, the liberal Western model. So as long as, well, they are aware that, well, Whitehead somehow provide an alternative kind of thinking about, or even a strong critique of the Western modernity, I guess, well, the Chinese officials would like to appropriate it as an alternative for China to orient or to go in that direction. So I hope I answer your question. So because, well, I'm not entirely sure how deep, well, the Chinese officials will accept this kind of Whiteheadian thoughts, well, in the Chinese context.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiwai. David, may I invite you to, because Casey didn't see your question, may I invite you to ask the question?
Hi. Yes, thank you. I don't know if you, can you see me? I'm not sure. Yes, what was my question? Yes. Well, thank you both. Well, thank you all three. I'm sorry I can't thank Victor as well. Fantastic panel. And I'm sorry I missed it this morning, but it was the middle of the night here in the UK. Casey, my question is, I'm really interested in the in unpacking the allegorical thinking that you're doing by juxtaposing the climate modification, the weather modification, and the cloud computing on the other hand. I understand that there's the connection through the question of control or the challenge of control, which is where you started. But is there more that can be done with that analogy, with that metaphor? And it feels to me like there's some elemental thinking going on there, for instance. Thank you.
Yeah, I perfectly agree. Well, thanks, David, well, for the questions, well, for wonderful questions. Well, yeah, I really want to advance a bit more, well, to kind of make connections, well, because I don't think they are really two different realms, well, because to do the modifications of weather, you also rely on a lot of data collected, right? So it also kind of heavily kind of make good use of, well, the cloud computing. And also you need to do a lot of immediate reactions, well, towards the weather, well, or even the longer term, well, climate. So I think, well, cloud computing is closely integrated, well, to the weather modification program. But I guess, well, because, well, I'm not good at science and well, I'm not trained in that area, so I don't know in what way I should advance, well, this argument. So probably need more time to think about what, but I'm pretty sure that, well, they are not two separate things. Even though, well, I try to point out the current political situation in which the Chinese leaders will try to really kind of separate all these things in different spheres. I guess separation would somehow facilitate a kind of the control mechanism rather than allow them to merge or combine together. But indeed, if we try to take an ecological perspective, we find that everything somewhat interconnected, right? But the way how we can find that kind of connection is always a problem for us. How we can articulate and illuminate that kind of connections in a more comprehensive way. It is always a question for us. So I'm still thinking about that. But thanks anyway for pointing this out. I kind of need more time to think about that.
Thank you, Casey. Thank you, David and QY. And Diane, you have a question.
Yes, thank you so much. So I'm very inspired by all the talks that has been delivered. I'm also working on my own paper about ecofeminism and postmodern. So I asked Dr. Zhang about a film that is called 路边野餐. I'm sure most of you have heard it. So I think some of the major aspects or the theme that have been discovered in the film that Dr. Zhang the text that Dr. Zhang talked about, it quite for me is quite similar. And I also see a more kind of powerful way because the director is a female director, for the way that they are trying to shape the narrative of their own. And also it's about, for me, for Dr. Zhang's presentation, for me, it's perhaps less about the critique, but it's about the reality that you are trying to demonstrate, is to show people that this is the reality that they live. And the problem is how for the future generation, how they can improve or fix the problem. And it's about, it invites criticism, but it's, for me, it's less about the critique, but more about the reality. And I'm also very interested in Professor Law's discussion about the Belt and Road Initiative. I took your course last year. Yeah, I wrote about that as well. Yeah, it's very inspiring. And I think I also agree with you that China would very welcome to reject any the Western kind of doctrine in terms of shaping their own nation, and it reminds me of the very recent the pandemic in Shanghai, and they are also doing this kind of censoring in terms of all the information online, and I have personal experience of that, and I think the reality is China is perhaps trying to shape a cyber world of their own, because internet, as one of the very famous reporter in China claims that he said that on internet, and he said China is trying to shape their own internet world. And that is not invented by the West, because Wi-Fi, that kind of thing used to be invented by the West. They are shaping their own kind of view, their own version of its the landscape of nationalist that kind of thinking as well. And it terms to me is there's a lot of uncertainty in that, and there's a lot of problems on that as well. But I think it can be a little bit dangerous in terms of thinking, the binary kind of thought in this about the censorship, and also a lot of the dialogue that the dynamic dialogue that has been going on as well. So for me, it's more about the uncertainties and also the anxieties. And I'm very glad that you mentioned the 内卷. It's a very popular term in mainland China now. And and I'm not saying it's a bad thing for especially for young people. It's very popular among the young group. And I see a lot of my friends is experiencing this kind of 内卷. They're very depressed. So I don't think it's a good, that kind of approach, but it's a very, I all I see is that kind of uncertainties and anxiety.
Thanks, Diane.
Yeah.
Thanks, Diane. Would you like to invite Zimo and Casey to respond to your question?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I kept my, I've been talking.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's really very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just quick response to Diane's very constructive reading of my take. Definitely, I think I'm trying to more read the text from a more constructive level. Especially what I feel is, it's true, what you said, it's reality, because I feel, especially I grew up in Dongguan myself, in the industrial town. So migrant workers for me feels very close, like really like physical presence. And so I feel so much we have talked about in theoretical support or debate or more data backing of civilization, ecological civilization, but well, I feel the real scientific evidence is already there, but it's just not being really framed in this way. So that's what I'm actually trying to do. And what you mentioned of Kelly Blue, I think, yeah, actually it's quite interesting because I haven't thought about the film in that way. But since you mentioned it, yeah, for sure, I think it's also situated in this post-socialist and rural, but especially it's also in Guizhou where there's many minority ethnic cultures. So definitely you see this diminishing marginalization of this alternative cosmology. And especially there's also this figure of the wild man in the woods, in the jungle. So I think can be read that there's a transcorporeality embeddedness of maybe the character in terms of this wild, wandering Garian figure, which is marginalized but still haunting in a sense. Yeah, I think that's very interesting readings from you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, I guess just a quick questions. Well, just a quick response. Well, to what you kind of your interesting comment on evolution. I guess from the perspective of economic growth, evolution of course is a bad thing. But I guess in my presentation I tried to open up a different perspective to look at evolution. Well, because from the view of control mechanism, evolution is not necessarily a bad thing. Well, the stagnant economy, even though it looks bad, well, in terms of economic competitions, and the geographical geopolitical tensions and all that, but somehow internally, I guess, from the regime's perspective, stagnant economy is easy to monitor and control than a kind of a fast-growing kind of economy that somehow they have to catch up with its momentum and mechanism. So this is only my quick response to your comments.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
And I think this is all we have for today. We have heard all the speakers and all the discussions. We'd like to thank not only the speakers of this panel, but the whole day and all the discussion and your wonderful questions and very, very, very inspiring comments. And before we close, I did ask Casey whether we need to thank father, thank mother, and thank the party. But I think Casey said they've all been thanked.
I thank all of them at the very beginning, the morning session. Well, though not many of us will have attended. But once again, I would like to express our gratitude to all our supporting colleagues, like Sui, Tang, Phoebe, Enoch, Brand, and many others. Well, I cannot name everyone here for making this conference possible. And of course, big thanks to all the speakers and moderators, as well as the participants of this symposium.
And I'd like to add that I think we all want to thank Casey because over the years, Casey has organized all these wonderful activities and edited special volumes and books and to promote all our work. Thank you, Casey. Thank you, Casey.